Welcome everyone, Costin here with a discussion about Nurgle in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. A race that has been substantially improved with the release of Thrones of Decay, though I would say with Thrones of Decay that the Empire and Dwarves got a much better deal. Like Creative Assembly did a better job with them, with making them both thematic to what those races should be, but also a lot more fun to actually play in their campaigns. It's been an argument for a while that with DLCs, Creative Assembly focuses on certain things more than others. For the record, it was a very tall order for CA to improve all three races as much as they did, and they succeeded brilliantly, so that's not a criticism to Thrones of Decay. Thrones of Decay is an amazing DLC, but it's just the fact that Nurgle, yes, it has been improved. It's gone from easily the single worst race in the game to actually play to a relatively mediocre one. Personally, I think Nurgle is very, very tedious to play. I do like the way that they've changed the mechanics, but I think that there are certain tweaks specifically, not overhauls, not reworks or anything like that, but certain tweaks they could make to make Nurgle campaigns a lot more interesting to actually deal with. So let's talk about that. And starting off with, I want to talk about the actual strengths Nurgle does have. You have one of the best infantry rosters, if not the best infantry roster in the game. You have really good units. Specifically chosen of Nurgle, I believe, are the single best infantry units in the game. Maybe the multiplayer community could enlighten me on that. But from what I've seen, from videos I've seen, from people testing out all that, they are really strong. Slow, sure, not as fast as some other units, but in terms of a one-on-one infantry fight, they are very, very strong. Now, they do have certain issues against certain matchups, but you do have good monsters, really powerful ones. Again, on the slower side, more durable, slower side, as opposed to the speed that you might need in certain situations. But you also do have fast-moving units. On top of that, you have an easy way of increasing hero capacity, because you can recruit every hero at tier 2 and increase their capacity at tier 3. And what's nice about this, yes, it requires the garrison buildings, which are not going to do anything beyond that. But here's the thing. You get 2 heroes for 1 structure increasing capacity. There are so many races in the game that only get 1 capacity at tier 3. And there's quite a few races that have tier 4 or tier 5 increased capacity. So being able to recruit all your heroes at tier 3 at tier 2 and increasing their capacity at tier 3 is a significant level of power. But there are quite a few mechanics that, as they currently stand, do make Nurgle campaigns tedium. A huge amount of tedium, and a huge amount of it. For instance, take into consideration Tamarkan's campaign. The Chieftains, the core mechanic that he has in his campaign. Well, you can only get Kaisk early on in your campaign until you've gotten Kaisk to aligned level. Now, here's the problem with that. There's only 2 ways of really increasing his alignment level. Until then, you can't get any of the others. And those ways are either creating plagues, which are, by the way, very expensive early on, and you're much better off using the infections you have to get military recruitment buildings, because otherwise you won't be able to recruit units, and by defeating Warriors of Chaos or Norska in battle. Now, how is this tedious? Just as an example for this particular campaign, the best overall Nurgle campaign for the record. How is this tedious? Well, it creates a situation. Because of the way the game works, you always want to defeat an enemy as quickly as possible when you enter a war. That doesn't mean you have to declare war on everyone as quickly as possible. When you are in a war with someone, you don't want to sit on your ass and let them build up. Because the AI cheats, or you might have unforeseen circumstances, or may take casualties. In Tamarkan's campaign, for instance, if you spend way too much time and take too many casualties against Kholek, who you start a war with, our account might just turn around, declare war on you, and wipe you out. Or inflict severe damage on you. So, you want to defeat Kholek as quickly as possible, but if you just fight Kholek directly, here's what's going to happen. You are going to, and if you're doing it as quickly as possible, because you can defeat Kholek pretty quickly. You have the army for it, you have the Lord, you have the hero. You can do so quickly. But you do want to get that aligned level, so you may want to deliberately leave Kholek alive until you unlock the other chieftain. So that means you're wasting several turns for that one purpose. And this is something that happens a lot in Nurgle campaigns. The power is there, the mechanics are there for the chieftains, for instance, Tamarkan, the hero capacity armies. You have one of the strongest things available in the game on the campaign map, which is vassalization for diplomacy, not subjugation, which Warriors of Chaos have, but you do have that available. But a lot of the way these things work ends up being very, very tedious. One big problem for Nurgle is the issue of climate. So you have a good amount of climate. Crucially, however, and very annoyingly at the same time, you don't have mountain. This may not necessarily be a big deal, except for the fact every single Nurgle campaign, be it Kugaf, Tamarkan, or Epidemius, are dealing with their principal flows in mountain climate. Consider the objectives that you have in a Tamarkan campaign. You have to defeat Grimgor, Kolek, and Greases. So you're wasting a lot of time for territory you don't care about. And this is actually not a great dynamic to be dealing with as Nurgle, because your buildings already take a good amount of time to construct. Increasing their construction time for settlement buildings by 50% is freaking awful. And this is a dynamic every single Nurgle campaign has to deal with. Yes, it's easily fixable with a mod, but the notion that you have all 3 campaigns dealing with foes in mountains, having to deal with that, and yet being screwed over by the climate situation is not a great dynamic. It's particularly awful that you have so many good climates available in your campaign, but the one that you could actually use that would improve your campaign experience is not suitable. And that is a problem to begin with. Another issue is how they get barracks. Now, why is that important? Why is it important to talk about barracks? Well, the way diplomacy works in Total War, if you want to get something from a faction, let's say you have some territory, but the AI, another AI faction, just something very simple, not the cheese, just something simple. Let's say you want a particular region from a faction, you're going to want to trade something for it. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult. The best trades are either landmarks, but the second best trades are military recruitment buildings. Not garrison buildings, actual military recruitment. Well, here's the problem for Nurgle. 2 issues. 1, to construct a basic barracks, it takes 4 turns. An advanced one, 6 turns. That means you're wasting more time. Now, some people are going to say, well, you know, not every campaign needs to be a speedrun. I agree. It shouldn't have to be the case, but that is the meta. And if you're not playing the meta, and the problem with that is the game is at its best, at its most challenging within the first 30 turns. Wasting time adds nothing but a grind. If you enjoyed the Enter Button Simulator, fair enough. But I'm going to state this as very clearly as I can. The hardest part of the game, the most challenging part of the game, the one where you have the most interesting decisions to make in every campaign on every difficulty level, if you're playing properly, is always in the early game. Everything beyond that, regardless of your skill level, is always going to be a grind. Even if you're playing the game on easy, it is those first 30 turns that define your campaign, whether or not you win or lose it. In fact, quite a lot of campaigns get determined by the first 10 turns, including all the Nurgle campaigns. You look at the campaigns over here. What are the challenges in Tamarkan, Kugaf's Epidemius campaigns? For Epidemius, it's Malus, Darkblade, and Malachi. For Kugaf, it's Gorst. To some extent, Greases. Maybe. Not really. At least until Ogres get reworked and Greases comes out from the mountains that obliterates you. In Tamarkan's campaign, it's Kolek, potentially Archeon if he declares war on you. He might. And Grimgor. All of those are early game challenges. Nothing compares to that. I don't care what level you're playing on. I don't care how you're playing it on. That early game is always going to be the most difficult. I don't necessarily approve of how the meta is, but to pretend it's anything other than that is plain bullshit. The hardest part, the most interesting part is always early game. So when you're wasting time because of climate, or you're wasting time because of construction time, you're just playing the Enter Button Simulator. That is not a fun experience. It's not conducive for a fun and entertaining campaign. And here's the thing, what's even worse for Nurgle. Individually, your armies are very strong, but if you can't recruit units because you have to wait for those basic barracks to be built in the first place and then cycle up, then you're just gonna sit on your ass win every battle that comes your way. That is not a good, fun experience. It's not even a challenging experience. Some people want to pretend that playing slowly is more challenging. No, it is not more challenging. If you're struggling in a mid or long game because of the AI compared to the early game, I'm gonna say it as bluntly as possible, you're a crap player. Anyone, and actually no, you're deliberately screwing it. Like, you have to deliberately screw yourself over to struggle more in the mid to long term in a campaign as opposed to the early game. The early game, because of the way the game is designed, is always the most challenging aspect, because it's when you have the lowest level heroes, lords, weakest armies, you have the most potential of factions attacking you, your enemies are at their peak. The AI just doesn't scale as well. Yes, they've given the AI a lot of cheats, so they'll throw higher tier units later on, but I can tell you, from my experience, it's still the early game challenge that is the meat of the campaign, as blunt as possible. But it's not just the construction time that screws you over in both recruitment and in terms of diplomacy, because you have the ability of vassalization, but one of the ways to achieve vassalization for diplomacy is to get a bunch of settlements with barracks in them. But for you, it takes 4 turns for each barracks to build it up. So that means it's slower, which means it's actually taking longer to get those vassal agreements going. You do eventually do it, but tedium upon tedium. Consider this campaign. This is turn 44. As many other races in the game, I would have long since finished this campaign. As vast majority of legendary lords in the game, I would have long since finished this campaign. Because I've dealt with Grimgor, I'm going into Cafe, you know, trying to vassalize Cafe. I'm slowly dealing with Greasus with one army that's just been pulverizing him all over the place. Regiments, renown, heroes, all that. I'm fighting over here against Emmerich. I took Tsar Nagrund with Tamarkan. I actually threw 2 stacks against Tsar Nagrund early on. So yeah, there's no challenge. It's just a grind at this particular point. There's no interesting decisions, there's no dilemmas, there's no, oh yeah, I have to, you know, consider, okay, my economy is going to crap, I need to preserve my money for X, or I'm not going to be able to win. That is not happening here. Again, it is over. Even if I lost 90% of my territory, I still wouldn't lose my campaign. I could build it back up. I would get a lot of my immortal heroes back, my immortal lords back. It would not be a problem. So yeah, that's just a waste of time. It is something that Creative Assembly should look to change, don't get me wrong. But the other issue is not just the time it takes, it's the resources it takes to build a barracks. Every single military production building costs infections. Now, inherently, this isn't necessarily a problem on its own. Requiring 200 or 400 infections to construct these is not necessarily a problem in isolation, if all you were doing with the infections was just spending it on military buildings. In fact, maybe that should be the thing, or maybe buildings should have their own dedicated resource. But here's the issue. You use infections for 2 other things, and those other things are actually quite expensive as well. You use them for plagues. One of the principal benefits in a Nurgle campaign are plagues. And yet I find myself in every Nurgle campaign except Tamarkan. With Tamarkan, it's only because I want to increase case alignment level. But I find myself in a lot of Nurgle campaigns just ignoring the plagues altogether, because there's better things I can do with my infections. Would I rather have 10 chosen in my faction, or would I rather have some buffs for my armies that are not going to stay there? I'd rather have 10 freaking chosen. I'll accomplish more with 10 chosen. That is the kind of decision you have in a Nurgle campaign. It is better than when they originally launched Thrones Decay, but you can only gain up to 100 infections per battle. But it's not just the plague situation. By the way, plagues are really expensive, at least for Tamarkan. You can lower, but incidentally is the one that actually cares about them the most, not because he needs them, but because he wants to increase that alignment level with Case, at least the first alignment level, as quickly as possible. You can reduce the cost by quite a bit with others, but here's the thing. It's not just that. It's also research, important one. If you don't spend infections to unlock research, 200, 400, however much it is, right? 400 over here, 200 for Contagious Horde. If you're not spending these, you're just going to get very basic research. There's some really, really good stuff over here that actually changes the playstyle quite a bit, like reducing the infection cost to create a plague. But you need 600 infections to unlock that. You need quite a bit for a basic military building, and you want variety. And that's, by the way, another problem. Because of the system, you actually end up in a kind of situation where you aren't going for a variety of units, you're just focusing on Warriors of Chaos and Chosen because they're your best units. Like, think of the Bile Trolls in a campaign like this. I've never recruited Bile Trolls in any single Nurgle campaign, because why would I? Like, they're the only unit in this entire building chain that I actually want. Everything else is a waste of my resources, very precious resources. And this applies to a lot of other things as well. Like, between these, the Living Tree of Decay and the Lesser Garden of Blight, going with anything other than living trees is a waste of resources. Like, going with the Garden of Blight is genuinely a significant waste of resources to get those units, because the cavalry units that you get over here are very bloody strong in this. Like the Plague Drones, pretty solid unit, the Chaos Knights of Nurgle, or the Rat Knights. Yes, Case can give you some of these, but Chaos Knights of Nurgle with Lances or Rat Knights, pretty good units. But that means I'm not using Plague Ogres. Plague Ogres, would you rather have Chosen or would you rather have Plague Ogres? And that's just building. Getting these buildings in the first place. That's not even considering the fact that with all of these military cycle buildings, you can always speed things up. Now, by the way, over here I did deliberately get the Lesser Garden of Blight, but this was not an optimal choice in this campaign. I wish to emphasize that. I'm not playing this campaign in the most optimal way in terms of like military production, because it kind of doesn't matter. In some ways, that's the sad part for Tamarkan. It's like you can fuck around with that. So I suppose you could go for, you know, the worst choice, but still, it's been a long road to even unlock this to begin with. And because, yeah, it's just basically tier 2 at this point. So I basically got it very, very recently as a building. I didn't even bother with either of these structures until this point, because I had plagues to get, I had research to get, I had barracks to get in order to get Drazov and Zaytan as my vassals. I'm also working on getting Astrogoth as my vassal over here in campaign. That's been my priority with barracks. Like, I've been spending so much in terms of infections just to build barracks to be able to get vassals in this campaign. If that sounds sad to you, it's because it freaking is. And even then, I'm not quite gonna be able to manage it with Astrogoth, sadly enough, at the moment. Gonna have to either declare war over here on Ungrim, drag Astrogoth into it. Maybe he loses some territory, and that will allow me to vassalize him, and then I'll have to clean up that mess. Or I'll have to build an army over here to deal with it. Now, you do have a good amount of capability of getting units through vassals and allies, because you can play that game. You have a capability of playing that game with Chaos factions, but obviously this is not necessarily the best gameplay, because you do have certain issues with Lord scale lines for there. But certainly a good amount of power, artillery, range power. You want to make full range armies as Nurgles, or at least with certain range units, you can absolutely do so. Tamarkan especially works well because of the chieftain situation with Doombolt. In that respect, yeah, Dreadquake mortars as Nurgle is really powerful. But between the climate, the research, the fact that infections are used for both speeding up cycles of buildings, constructing those buildings, the first place research, and plagues, all at the same time, is not a great system. Maybe Nurgle needs an extra resource. Maybe we need more infections. I don't think adding more infections would be the solution, because I personally do believe that if you add more infections, people are just going to spam more Chosen and Warriors of Chaos in a campaign instead of going with plagues. No, you need plagues to work differently. The best Nurgle campaign in the game is actually Festus. The reason that's the case By the way, the only real mod I'm using here is Toggle 5 just to show on the map. But the reason this is, Festus only uses infections for plagues, dedicated for plagues. His recruitment is unrelated to that. What would I say with regards to all of this? Yeah, maybe research shouldn't require infections to begin with. Maybe plagues and unit recruitment shouldn't be tied to the same system. At least one thing needs to be separated. It can be research, can be military production, can be the cycling of buildings. I'd rather spend money. By the way, what's annoying here is this even slows you down further, because one of the ways to handle this situation with regards to the lack of infections is construct a lot of these buildings that give you a certain number of infections per turn. But that means you're not getting hero recruitment buildings. It means you're missing out on growth buildings. You're missing out on economic buildings. You have to make that trade-off. And it's not a great trade-off. It doesn't make you weaker. It just means you're wasting more time, because with less money means less armies. Less armies means it takes longer to do stuff. It's not a great dynamic to play a faction in Warhammer 3 that just has fewer armies than other people. Not because it's more challenging, but because it's a lot more tedious than otherwise would be. Because you know you could win the campaign much faster, not easier necessarily. Like, the best thing you can do, by the way, when you have a lot of armies is not keep them all together. That's a horrible use of resources. It's spread them apart as much as you can. Sometimes you do have two armies playing together, you know, in close proximity. But very rarely do I have more than two armies at most. And in the vast majority of cases, most campaigns, I only play with one on each front. That's kind of the thing. If I'm bringing two armies, I really want to kill something, basically, very quickly. That's the only situation in which I bring more than one army. Or I just don't care. I just want to resolve everything. Worth saying that aspect. Not that Nurgle has a problem about winning battles. Again, you don't have a problem winning battles, especially as Tamarkan. You have a problem with just like completing the victory conditions because of all the issues that come with it. You know what's even worse about this? What's kind of like the cherry on the cake of this horrible tedium? You have vassalization for diplomacy, as I said. You have really powerful legendary lords that you could vassalize, and they could just trivialize a lot of things for you. That's the thing. And you're kind of incentivized to do so, because again, you have limited armies. You can't expand as quickly as possible. So one of the best decisions you can make in a campaign is get a couple of vassals to do it for you. This is what makes Nakari ridiculous, for instance. But here's the problem. You can't win your campaign unless you actually eliminate the factions you're meant to. You can't destroy or vassalize. Be'lakor can, by the way, destroy or vassalize some factions. You have to destroy them. So you have to pick certain fights that are completely unnecessary. Like, consider the situation with Greasus and Grimgor. Do you need to fight Grimgor in this campaign? Are you absolutely forced to do so? No, you could vassalize them for diplomacy, but you won't be able to achieve your victory conditions and get the victory screen in the campaign if you do so. But if you had the ability of vassalizing Grimgor and winning and achieving the victory condition through it, then you could just leave Grimgor to deal with Greasus. So you avoid a fucking mountain dynamic altogether. It would make this campaign so much better if I could focus on climate that's actually good, as opposed to wasting my fucking time dedicating one of my principal armies, one of the few armies I have, with freaking Chosen in it just to beat up Greasus. And that, by the way, has been going on for over 20 turns in this campaign. Maybe 25, closer to 30 potentially. It just gives you an idea on certain things. Questine signing out. Stay tuned for more.